Thank you, Madam Chair and members. For the record, my name is Judy Randall, Legislative Auditor, and I want to say thank you for holding today's hearing to receive an overview of our findings and recommendations from our program evaluation on voter registration. As you all know, the state's voter registration process is complex. Nearly 3.8 million individuals were registered to vote in Minnesota at the beginning of this year. Each one of those individuals submitted a new voter registration application at some point in time, and many of those individuals have also changed their registration record at some point in time to reflect a move, a name change, or some other relevant change. Each time a voter registration record is created or updated, it triggers a series of processes, some managed by the Office of the Secretary of State, and many more handled by county election offices in county offices across the state. County staff must follow established processes to verify both the identity and the residency for each registered voter. Among other things, these processes involve matching information in a voter's registration application with multiple data sets, including the Federal Social Security Administration and a number of different state agency databases, including databases and data sets from Department of Public Safety, Department of Corrections, and the Department of Health. The processes that county staff must follow also involve some judgment and some manual processes. For example, they must work with applicants to correct application errors. They must work to update voter registration records based on new information. And they must notify individuals whose right to vote has been restored. As we will discuss in more detail, we found that the Office of the Secretary of State has established adequate procedures for processing and maintaining voter registration records, which is the scope of that office's authority and responsibility. The Office of the Secretary of State does not have oversight authority for the voter registration work conducted by county staff. We found some opportunities for improvement at the county level, where we identified voter registration records that were either not updated accurately or where we could not confirm the accuracy because county staff had not documented the rationale for the assigned voter status. To get into the details of these and other findings, and also to discuss the recommendations, I would like to now turn to Ms. De La Cueva, who is the manager for this program evaluation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome to the commission meeting. Please state your name, and we're happy to receive your report.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. For the record, my name is Sarah De La Cueva, and I'm with the Office of the Legislative Auditor. I was the manager of the evaluation of voter registration, and I'm pleased to be with you today to tell you a little bit more about that report. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the team members who worked with me on this evaluation, Scott Fusco and Gretchen Becker, and I would also like to acknowledge the assistance of Kyle Malone, Laura Schwartz, and David Kirchner, who all provided invaluable assistance on this evaluation. Thank you for all your contributions. All right. I will start by giving you an overview of the findings that I'm going to discuss today. The Office of the Secretary of State, which I'll refer to as OSS, has established appropriate procedures for processing voter registration applications. Counties processed at least 99% of identity and residency verification transactions correctly. Counties, however, did not always update voter registration records appropriately. And finally, federal law, state law, and OSS established different criteria for inactivating voter registration records. Before we dig into those findings, I'm going to provide a bit of background information to make sure we've got the context for the rest of the presentation. As you all probably know, in Minnesota, you must be registered before you can vote in any election in the state. Voter registration is governed by federal and state laws. Minnesota, however, is exempt from one of the two key federal laws, the National Voter Registration Act, and by extension it's exempt from portions of the Help America Vote Act. Minnesota statutes establish additional requirements, and Minnesota rules provide further detail on how to meet those requirements. The responsibility for voter registration is split between OSS and counties. OSS maintains the state's data system, the statewide voter registration system, SVRS, and also provides training and guidance for counties. The counties are responsible for the bulk of managing records in SVRS. They process applications, create new records, update applications when voter information changes, and also change voter statuses when circumstances require. While OSS provides guidance for counties, it is worth emphasizing that OSS does not have the authority to enforce county compliance with voter registration laws. All right, next I'm going to provide a quick breakdown of the commonly used voter registration methods, of which there are several. Individuals can register to vote before Election Day through automatic voter registration, or AVR, which occurs when an individual applies for or updates their driver's license issued by the Department of Public Safety's Driver and Vehicle Services Division, or DVS. DVS may forward applications on to OSS only if the individual provides citizenship affirming documentation during that license transaction. OLA is currently conducting a separate evaluation of DVS's implementation of AVR, so I will not go into details on that process today. An individual can apply online using a form on the OSS website. An individual can also apply on paper. Paper applications can be submitted through the mail, in person, to OSS or counties, or through voter registration drives. On Election Day, an individual can fill out a paper application or an electronic equivalent at their polling place and become registered on the day of the election. Applications submitted through absentee ballots are also considered Election Day registrations for the purpose of application processing. All right, now, one last thing, sorry. And to wrap up my background information, it's important to understand that a voter registration record has a voter status. There are two voter statuses that are considered registered statuses. Those are active. Those folks are eligible, registered, and can vote simply by signing the roster on Election Day. Challenged individuals have a notation on their record indicating that they must provide information before they're able to vote. They do appear on the roster on Election Day, but they must speak with an election judge and clear their challenge by answering questions prior to voting. The most common reason for being challenged is because a piece of non-forwardable election mail was returned. Non-registered statuses include deceased, which means, as you might imagine, that the individual has died. Deleted means that an individual ended up somehow with two records and the county merged those two records and deleted one of them. Inactive means that an individual is no longer registered to vote because they've not voted in the precinct for a certain amount of time or in a prescribed amount of time, or they've moved out of state. If an individual with an inactive status must re-register if they wish to vote.
Excuse me,
Yes.
how often are the non-registered statuses updated?
Updated?
Yes.
They are updated whenever OSS or the counties receive information that indicates a record should be updated. And I'm going to talk quite a lot about different reasons that records are updated as the presentation goes on. So anytime.
So as we approach an election day, does that happen every day?
There are a lot of sources of data that OSS receives on a monthly basis and passes on to counties as they receive those. There are some sources of information that occur daily. So.
We'll ask the Secretary of State about that more.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. The final status I'll mention is pending, and this is used for individuals who are not yet registered. This includes 16 and 17-year-olds who pre-registered but are not active yet, and individuals who are registered through AVR but still have time to opt out before they become a registered voter. These non-registered statuses do not appear on a roster on Election Day. All right. Now I'm going to move into the findings, and I will start with our overall finding about OSS. We found that OSS has generally established appropriate procedures for processing voter registration applications. We found that OSS, the rules and guidance that OSS has established generally align with law and in the areas that we evaluated for this project. We found that SVRS is designed in a manner that supports county compliance with the law. And when we surveyed counties, county election staff were overwhelmingly in agreement that OSS provides useful guidance and timely and helpful resources. All right, the rest of this presentation is going to focus on the counties. And before I dive too far into it, I'll briefly describe sort of what we're going to be looking at. And let's see. So we used SVRS data to review how counties handle certain situations and certain aspects of processing voter registration records. We analyzed identity verification, which is the process of confirming that an applicant is who they say they are. Residency verification, which is the process of confirming that an individual lives where they say they live. And then the maintenance of voter registration records is the process of updating voter registration records to reflect changes in the voter's life circumstances, such as a move out of state or becoming ineligible through incarceration. For identity and residency verification, which I'll tackle first, we restricted our analysis to first-time applicants who submitted their applications around the time of the 2024 primary and general elections. So specifically from July 1st, 2024 to November 5th, 2024. This resulted in a population of 211,000 applications, more or less, and those are the ones we're going to be talking about today. Before I dive into how counties did with identity verification, I'm going to briefly describe the process for you. The process starts when a county creates a voter registration record on account of receiving an application of some sort. SVRS automatically checks information from that application against the information in DVS's driver's license database. If an exact match is found, that applicant's identity is verified. If there's no match or only a partial match that the county does not think represents the same person, then SVRS goes on to check the application against the Social Security Administration. If a match is found with Social Security data, the applicant their identity is verified. If no match is found, the county reviews the information in the application and must try to contact the applicant to determine whether there is an error in that information. The applicant may provide additional information, and the county may then correct that information and send the application through the process again, and they may become verified after that point or continue working through the gray boxes. However, if the county does not find additional information to correct the application, they label the application as unverifiable and they challenge the voter record.
So, excuse me, so does that mean that at that point that person may not vote?
At that point, the person has a challenge notation on their record, and if they arrive at their precinct to vote, they will need to answer questions from the election judge in order to clear that challenge.
Even after it's gone through all of that procedure?
Yes,
They can
individuals
still
always have the
answer
opportunity.
questions.
Individuals always have the opportunity to clear their challenge by attesting to the information that they actually are who they say they are, or that the circumstance that they've been challenged for is no longer applicable.
What are the typical questions that would be asked at that point that would confirm the eligibility of the person to vote?
Madam Chair, thank you. Don't have those at the top of my head. I know that the Office of Secretary of State has an administration guide for election judges, which gives examples of the questions to ask for each type of challenge. And they can provide more information if you need it.
Another question for the Secretary? Go ahead.
Thank you.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just for clarification on slide 8, where does the HAVA SSA site requirement show up in that process?
Madam Chair and Representative
I want to
Quam.
make sure that I pronounce your name correctly. It's De La Cueva? Is
De La
that
Cueva,
Okay.
correct.
I will not neglect to do that in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. De La Cueva.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Quam. Yes, the third gray box checks against Social Security Administration. That is the HAV website that you're referring to.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. Representative Anderson.
Thank you. Oops, thank you. When they're checking against driver and vehicle services, are they just looking to see if that person has a driver's license? Or, because that's where there's a lot of question, because we give driver's licenses to, anybody, right? So so what are they checking there? Thank you.
Ms. Della Cueva.
Madam Chair, Representative Anderson, thank you for the question. What they are checking for is identity, is the person who they say they are. So they are looking for an exact match of driver's license name and date of birth to confirm that the individual is who they say they are. They do not have a process for checking for citizenship, which is not required or allowed under law.
Thank you. I think that answers the question. So,
Thank you. Please continue, Senator Coran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Della Cueva, in the scenario, you just described the scenario for what most people go through. They have a driver's license or social security number and or an address. So this process doesn't describe, and what have you guys done to validate the process for which a driver's license isn't required, nor is a social security number required, nor is an address required? That doesn't seem to be reflected in this chart. Will that be covered later, or was that a part of this process?
Ms. Della Cueva.
Madam Chair, Senator Cran, thank you for the question. Yes, in the name of simplicity, I did not include that eventuality on the chart. There is, when an individual fills out a paper application, they do have the opportunity to check a box saying that they have not been issued either a social security number or a driver's license number. And in that case, they do not, they're not going to be able to pass this process. There is a mechanism by which they can show their ID on election day if they've applied by mail. That is required. We've got a chart in our report on page 25, Exhibit 2.5, and which were you pointing at me at? Yes. I'm not sure that applies to the election. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, this chart does show the rates at which people were validated with different types of applications, and the ability to not provide a driver's license or social security number, the last 4 digits, is only available for paper applications, which were validated at the rate of 94%, it looks like.
Senator Coran.
Madam Chair, and thank you. When we read this and when people see it, they're going to look and say, oh, everything's wonderful. But there is still a huge portion, and it's not you. The law the law enables it. So but I just wanted to make sure people understand. You don't have to have a driver's license. You don't have to have a social security number or provided, nor an address. And the only way we validate somebody, attempt to validate somebody, is by the postcard follow-up after the election, after somebody gets to vote. And so it's a challenge, and I believe, and I know our Secretary of State and everybody here who voted for it loves that. Unfortunately, it's a big gap. It is a gap. We don't know how big it is. So thank you.
Thank you.
Continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry. Representative Jacob, I apologize.
Thank you, Chair Rest. So just as I'm looking through the check boxes, at what point in the process is a person prohibited from voting? Is it when you get to that orange box, or?
Ms. Della Cueva.
Madam Chair, Representative Jacob, thank you for the question. Yes, when you get to the orange box, challenge is unverifiable, that individual will have a designation of challenged on their voter record. And if they arrive at the polls, then they will need to answer questions posed by the election judge in order to proceed to vote.
And so then,
Representative Jacob.
thank you, Chair Rest. So throughout the rest of the process, the person would still be allowed to vote, and we would just verify later. Is that correct?
Ms. Delacueva.
Madam Chair, Representative Jacob. If someone, the Secretary of State may wish to check me on this, but my recollection is that if somebody clears their challenge by answering questions for the election judge and signing the roster attesting that they are answering those questions honestly, then their record is activated, and they are no longer required to provide additional documentation in the future unless their name or address changes, for example.
Representative Jacob, then Representative Quam.
That's good, thank you.
Okay, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Something missing in 8 is at what point they cast the vote, because some of these boxes don't happen till days or maybe weeks afterwards. So at what point, because we've got 46, we've got a lot of days we can vote, and we've got many that we can actually go in, register and vote and run it through the machine. So how many of these boxes happen before same-day registration person votes?
Ms. Delacueva.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Quam, thank you for the question. This graphic is representing the typical process that occurs regardless of the type of application. If somebody registers at least 21 days in advance of the election, all of these steps happen before the election. And if someone is registering on Election Day, then they are permitted to vote on Election Day, and all of these steps occur after the election. By law, counties have 42 days to enter Election Day applications into the statewide voter registration system, and at that time, these checks will be initiated.
So, Ms. Delacueva, if the challenged voter does not meet the satisfaction in terms of the questions that are asked of the election judge, is that person's ballot set aside and not put in the machine or counted in whatever way that voting precinct or township or whatever?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. When someone appears at their precinct on Election Day, those questions are being asked by the election judge before they're handed a ballot. So if someone refuses to answer a question or does not answer to
They don't
satisfaction,
even get the ballot?
They don't get the ballot.
Thank you. Senator Dibble.
So I just wanted to go back to make sure that we heard the answer to Representative Quam's question. I think the concern was that some of this process occurs after someone has voted, for those who are registering to vote prior to an election, and the response was no, pre-registration deadline is 21 days before the election. Right, and then for same-day voter registration, there is a fairly specific list of identity verification documents that someone has to bring with them, or alternatively, they can bring a neighbor or a family member who can attest to their identity or to their address, their residency. But they have to bring some established form of proof of identity on the day of.
Ms. Delacueva, would you want to confirm that?
Madam Chair, Senator Dibble, that is accurate, yes.
Thank
If you are registering on Election Day, then you must provide one of the documents that that is established in statute and rule, or else have someone from the precinct vouching for you, someone who is already registered in the precinct vouching.
Representative Quam, I'm going to call on you, but I saw that the auditor had her hand raised as well. Auditor Randall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Dibble, Representative Quam, for these questions. I think taking a close look at the exhibit on page 25 would be really instructive and helpful here. And I'm just going to take a moment to walk us through it, because I think that might answer some of the questions, and then, of course, we can continue. So the first line is automatic, so it's those folks who registered via AVR. And the numbers here are, as you see, rounded to the nearest 100. And these were the table reflects the applications submitted from July 1, 2024 through November 5th, 2024. So leading up to the 2024 election. So that's our time frame. So you can see 56,300 applications came through via AVR. That verification process that's laid out on this slide happened before Election Day. And you can see that 100% of those people, their identity was verified. Next line are people who submitted their applications on.
Monica Randall, when you say their identity was done, that means that they are confirmed to being a citizen. Is that correct or not? So please be more specific.
Sure. Madam Chair, thank you for that question. What identity verified means is it means that they are who they say they are. There's not a citizenship check in law as part of voter
Irrespective of
registration.
citizenship.
Correct.
Thank you.
The next line is for those who registered online, and we received 53,700 applications for registration, again, in this time period. And again, 100% of those, they were confirmed to be who they said they were. And this, again, was before Election Day. The next group is those who registered via paper. They could mail this in or they could bring it in person. Much smaller number, 8,300 applications came via paper, and you can see the subsets. And of those, 94% were confirmed to be who they were, which means it was going through this process, and they ended up as challenged as unverifiable. They're still on the roster on Election Day. They can still go and show up, but they will need to answer some additional questions and perhaps show ID before they receive a ballot, before they are able to vote. The federal postcard application is a very small subset of folks. I'm not going to dwell on that. These are for people who are in the armed services or things like that who are overseas. Okay, the next big chunk, and I will note that on the top half of this exhibit, we have over 100,000 of the applicants. It's more than half of the applicants in this time period had registered in advance of Election Day. We now get to those who registered on Election Day, and you can see that the total there is 75,400. And of those, so now these are all people who show up to the polls. They provide one version of the required documentation that the law says is required so that they can vote. They fill out the paperwork, they submit they show the information, they vote. Then the process for confirmation happens. So these people have all voted, their ballots have all been put in the box, if you will. Of those, 98% of the Election Day registration folks, their identity was verified, again, meaning that they were who they said they were. And then the remaining 2% now are marked as challenged on the roster so that the next time they come to vote, they would need to clear that challenge. So that's kind of what happens before and what happens after. And then that challenge for the Election Day registration folks would stay with them until they update their registration information, until they show up to the polls to vote and they have that challenge notation and they clear the challenge by answering questions or providing additional information, or they stop voting and eventually they are designated as inactive because they haven't voted for a prescribed amount of time or had no activity. So I think this table here, this exhibit here on page 25 provides a lot of information that we thought we couldn't get to during the presentation, but I guess we misjudged on that. Thank you for indulging me on that walkthrough.
Thank you, Auditor Randall. Any further inquiries? Representative Quam.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Senator Barr.
And I just wanted the people that might be listening to understand that if they fail all these asks and et cetera, they can still say and attest, hey, I can vote. The ones that are on the rolls listed as challenged, I believe It was either the one that was first presented in 2018 or the sampling additional one in 2018 audit of the registration system indicated that there was a county that had a large number of those listed as challenged that actually went through and voted. So therefore, it should be realized that being challenged has not stopped people from voting, no matter what reason they were challenged. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Representative Quam. Senator Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Della Cueva, I was kind of with Senator Quam's question, the self-attestation. Where does that fit into that process? That's my first question.
Ms. Della Cueva.
Madam Chair, Senator Barr, thank you for the question. The individual needs to do some self-attestation a couple of times. On the original application to vote, they must sign attesting that they meet all of the eligibility requirements in law. And then when they arrive at the polls, they must sign the roster, attesting again that they are eligible to vote. And if they are an election day registrant, then they are doing that application and signing the roster at the same time.
Senator Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if they show up to the poll, they don't have an ID card, they can't provide a bill or something that verifies residence, they can still cast a ballot through self-attestation. Is that correct or incorrect?
Ms. Della Cueva.
Madam Chair, Senator Barr, thank you. That is not quite right. If someone doesn't have any of the required proofs of residency, then the only way that they could register would be to have an individual already registered in the precinct vouch for them and attest that they live in the precinct. If they do not have someone to vouch for them, they do have to provide documentation in order to become registered and receive their ballot on that day.
Senator, Representative Quam, you're shaking your head.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if they don't have documentation such as address and et cetera, they are allowed as long as they attest. So the exact statement you made is incorrect, that does not and hasn't prevented them from voting, because we've got, even in previous audits, documentation of people who are on the challenge list who only voted because they attested, not because of any documentation. And no, you cannot say that people haven't done anything but attest and not had documentation, because I have heard from the election judges and election judge boards on this and in previous discussions that could have been during the 2018, one of the hearings, or after. But it's been stated that you can attest if you're missing and still vote. And I have not seen or heard of anyone actually being prevented after they attest.
Ms. Randall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Quam. What you're saying is true for folks who are challenged, which means that they have already registered and gone through the process, and then for some reason something's not verifiable, they have a challenge notation, they show up, they can attest, and then they can vote. For folks who are registering for the first time through EDR, they do have to present one form of this documentation or information, or have somebody vouch for them to be able to register for the first time. So there are these distinctions between the first time registrant and somebody who has already registered and who has been challenged. Those folks can attest. That is correct. First time registrants, an attestation alone is not sufficient, and that's under the law.
Madam Speaker?
Representative Quam.
Then either the law has been changed or hopefully counties are actually following the law, because I have a fairly decent memory, and I remember back when we had the previous audits with multiple discussions that there were people that registered same day, didn't have the documentation, didn't have a voucher, and still voted through saying, hey, I can legally vote. So I'm hopeful that what you said is universally approved. I'd like to have it, all the counties make sure that they're aware of it.
Representative Jacob, and then Senator Barr. Representative Jacob.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Rest. So as you look at these numbers about which ones are verified and which ones are not, doing that percentage, adding up the numbers, comes to 2,698 people who are fall in between the 100% and the 90 or whichever percentage that happens to be. Of those 2,698, what I'm understanding is we count every vote and then we verify later. Of those 2,698 votes that are unverified, how many of them are we counting?
Ms. Delacueva?
Madam Chair, Representative Jacob, thank you for the question. Minnesota does not have a system of provisional balloting, so if someone casts a ballot at their precinct, their vote is counted. And if, as Ms. Randall explained, if someone is found in the identity verification process after the election to not be who they, or to have a question about whether they are who they say are, they will be challenged for future elections. That's how our law is currently structured.
Representative Jacob.
So, Chair West, just so I'm 100% clear, essentially all these votes are counted. Our policy is to count every vote and then verify later, but the election could have already been called, right? I mean, 2,698 votes is a lot of votes when you've got elections coming down to 7 votes.
Ms. Monson Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Jacob. For the record, my name is Jody Munson Rodriguez. I'm the Deputy Legislative Auditor for OLA's Program Evaluation Division. I just did want to clarify one thing, that we're talking about registration in the top half of this table that we're looking at on Exhibit 2.5. The fact that they were registered doesn't necessarily indicate that they voted. So I just want to make sure that we're all clear about what we're talking about here, that the top half is, they're all registration, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they cast a ballot. Thank you.
Is it a crime to register illegally? Just to make that clear as well.
Yeah, I got
Thanks,
that.
Senator. I'm going to go to this side of the table, if you don't mind. Representative Greenman has her hand raised.
Thank you, Chair Rest. And I just sort of want to bring us back to what this audit was about, which is our voter registration system. And I appreciate that. It also, I think when we get there, says what we heard was the Secretary of State is providing good guidance to the counties. We're about to hear from the counties about how they're processing. A lot of the questions we have, I think, are better directed to the folks who are both administering our elections at the county level and providing guidance to those counties, which the audit says are doing a really good job. I'll just be honest, I've never been in an audit before of most of our things that say over 99% both accuracy and accessibility. So maybe I think many of the questions that we're getting at, we actually should listen to both the rest of this audit about their voter registration process, and then listen to the folks who the auditor says are actually administering our elections accurately.
Thank you, Representative Greenman. Senator Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm actually looking forward to hearing all of the rest of the audit as well, but so we don't forget some of our questions as we're going. I understood this pretty well, I thought, with the top half is you go through the system, that's the top half of your chart here, and that's you challenged or whatever, and you can come back and do all the rest of it. But the bottom half is the election, in-person election day. And those people didn't show up to register on election day. They showed up to cast a ballot, and they need to get registered so they can get their ballot. And that's where Representative Jacobs' number of 2698, if you just take the raw numbers you have here and do your percentages, you're looking at 2698 where the identity was not verified in person that day as they're doing the in-person registration. And the way I understood your presentation was those people were given.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry.
Is the photographer a private person or a member of the media? I just need to verify that. I don't allow private. Thank you very much. I don't allow private photography in the hearing here. But you're not private. You're the press. Thank you very much for verifying that. Senator Burr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the way I understood that, of those 2,698, and that may not be an exact number because, rounding of 4% of 11,800. So just using those percentages, you're coming up roughly 2,700 people that cast a ballot, but you couldn't verify the identity on Election Day for same-day registration. But they were given a ballot and they were allowed to cast. So those 2,700 ballots were cast, and we have no way to retract those back out because of not having a provisional ballot system. That is correct, right? And I believe that is something that we should address in future legislatures is if we're going to have same-day registration, we should have a mechanism where we verify the identity prior to that ballot getting cast so that we don't have to worry about trying to figure out, we can't pull a ballot back. It's in the box. We can't separate it from the rest of them. So, if you can't verify it, you can't count. That's the way that should work, and that's the problem we have right now. Yeah, they are counted, but they shouldn't until the identity is verified. That's my comment. So.
Thank you, Senator Burr. Anyone else? Representative Anderson.
I have one more follow-up on my earlier question. So we don't have any way, when we're pinging against the driver's license system, there isn't any way that it distinguishes between citizens and non-citizens when it's pinging? And then furthermore, is there any way when it's pinging against Social Security cards, whether they're citizens or non-citizens?
Ms. Della Cueva or either, any of you.
Thank you.
Please,
Thank you,
Auditor
Madam
Randall.
Chair, and thank you, Representative Anderson. Right now, because that is not a requirement under the election laws, that is not what is conducted. Is it technologically possible? Maybe. I will note that the AVR process does do that. It does, when somebody produces citizenship affirming documentation, then they now kind of flow through the AVR, the automatic voter registration process, and they come in, and that's a whole new system, and we have another report coming out later this year on that process. But that is kind of almost a new check that does do citizenship affirming documentation review prior to registration. But that is not something under Minnesota's current laws that is a requirement to prove citizenship. So right now, those pings against DVS and the pings against Social Security Administration do not check for that.
Okay, thank you. And for those of you that will be here next year, I would suggest we work on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Anderson. Anyone else before we continue? Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the auditor and kind of following up on Representative Greenman that we've been through a lot of audits where there have been, shall we say, not great results. But, when I look through this, and obviously this is a very hot conversation during an election year. People have beliefs, and when they have beliefs, they use adjectives like creating doubt on things. But I think it's really important for the legislative auditor to do things that are evidence-based. And I see throughout the report 99.9%, 99%, 98%, 99.9%. I'm just looking on page 4 of the slides, the identity verification on AVR, 99.9%. I'm old enough to remember that's better than Ivory soap. I think that was 99.4%. But this is good work by the counties and the Secretary of State and the auditor. And, you know, it was 2018 when we heard this again, and sometimes when you come back to an entity and they haven't done things, but this is a continual process improvement, which has been doing things with the legislature to make things clearer. I'll take a 99.9%. I mean, I don't think we've seen those results ever anywhere else. And so I think it's a good audit, and I think we should continue to focus on the evidence rather than the doubt.
Thank you, Representative Hanson. Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And for the purpose of clarity, if I'm interpreting this correctly, residency verification process determinations, that includes ones where they were found not to be. They're verifying. Does that mean that they're verified, and what portion? I'm trying to understand is if the verification process was accurate, but does that mean that everything that was verified was that their address was correct and that there weren't any issues? And it'd be interesting to understand how many non-street addresses, percentage-wise, were part of the pool, because, you know, there wasn't a real way to verify that. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Quam. Any comment? Ms. Dela Cueva.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question, Representative Quam. Residency verification is something I do plan to get into in more detail later in the presentation, but I can go ahead and just give you the preview that the process is to send a verification card to the address, and if it is a non-forwardable card, if it is returned as undeliverable by the post office, that person is considered not verified for residency and their record is challenged. And to get at your question on the non-street addresses, state law does require that the paper application have the opportunity for someone to provide an address description rather than an actual address. And as of early this year, only 88 people had taken advantage of that in the entire 3.8 million registered voters.
Thank you, Representative Quam. Senator Drazkowski is online.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. De La Cueva. Looking at these, I'm struck by the number of people that are registered on election day rather than the rest of the year. Going back to Representative Jacobs and Senator Barr's discussion, of those large number of people that register on election day, it looks like 2% are not verified. And so those, Ms. De La Cueva, are people who were not identified in those 14 days or whatever the counties and the Secretary of State are given to verify them after the election, after they've already voted. They have not even been verified through that process. Is that what you're telling us?
Ms. Dela Cueva.
Madam Chair, Senator Drazkowski, thank you for the question. That is accurate. When someone registers on election day, they cast their ballot, it is counted, and the county has 42 days to enter that new voter application into the SBRS. And when that is done, it initiates this process on this slide, and they won't know until that time whether they pass it.
Senator Drazkowski.
So, Madam Chair. So, Madam Chair, thank you, Ms. De La Cueva. So it looks like the 2% of the people that cheat on election day and are not verified, even through this antiquated process that we have in today's technology, they are disenfranchising people who were legally voting. And I really don't trust that the system follows up on those 2 out of 100 that cheated, the 98 out of 100 that followed the law and met the requirements. But I hope that that's something that is in your recommendations here, which I have not gotten to yet. A second and follow-up question would be, why do we have so many people voting or registering on election day in this state compared to the rest of the year? It seems to me that you would expect most of them, the bulk of the people, to be registered on the rest of the year through the AVR, the online registration, the paper registration. How does that compare to other states? Have you looked at those numbers? This seems to be wildly in the direction of registering on the very vulnerable election day where that 2 out of 100 can cheat out the 98 out of 100. So why is that happening, and are we seeing that in other states?
Senator Drazkowski, before I call on Representative Greenman, I would take issue with assuming that someone who is unverifiable is cheating and that they're not a citizen. I think that is outrageous.
Well, Madam Chair,
I'm calling on Representative Greenman. Senator Drazkowski, I'll come back to you. Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And for folks, and I think we'll get to this when the Secretary of State comes up, there's lots of reasons you wouldn't match, including having a hyphen in your name. So the idea that 2% is cheating, one, is misinformation and disinformation and potentially disenfranchising folks. When we actually listen to the facts, both that the auditor presents and, again, the local elections officials who are the ones who actually administer our elections, they can walk you through the very boring and important ways that things work. But requiring an exact match for your name means that there's lots of people, if you are Richard and maybe you registered under Rick, you might come back in that 2%. And so I think, again, we need to, in this room, when we are talking about audits, we need to deal with facts. And I appreciate the chair bringing us back to that, and I appreciate the OLA. The other thing that I will just say is I think that we have, as the chair said, we have a set of criminal laws, both federal and state, about both registering and voting when you are ineligible. We have a Department of Justice and that is ready and willing to prosecute those cases. So when we talk about, and we have local authorities who have a requirement to do that too. When we talk about that, if we want to get into that conversation, not about voter registration, which is what this audit is about, but actually voting ineligibly, those are the stats we should actually be looking at, because right now what people are doing is pointing to data, making inferences that are not true. And the other thing, just to you, Representative Drazkowski, I believe, and I should verify this with the auditor, the reason that the registration numbers themselves are look lower is because 80% of Minnesotans are already registered and they wouldn't show up in this table because this is table of people who were registered between the period of time in that period. So what you're doing, Representative Drazkowski, is actually just misreading this table. And so I'd love to just for clarity to make sure that we are actually talking about how it would be helpful, maybe I think for you, Representative Drazkowski, to hear what are the percentages of people who register, who are pre-registered, who register through AVR, and who register on election day? Because I believe the percentages are actually relatively low for same-day registration in the 10 to 15%.
Thank you, Representative Greenman. And just for the record, Senator Drazkowski is retiring from the Senate, not from the House. Senator Drazkowski, I'll come back to you before I call on the auditor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I find it kind of awkward, Madam Chair, that my question, which was directed to the auditor, was redirected by the chair to another member of the committee. I haven't seen that before.
It wasn't your question, sir. It was the fact that she had requested to speak. And I was calling on her.
Well, I haven't seen that before.
Senator Drazkowski.
Madam Chair, I haven't seen that before. I haven't seen that before either.
Well, there you go.
I am not going to be rope-a-dope by Representative Greenman on these numbers and what we have going on here. We have 2% of the population that on election day does not meet the law They don't meet the law when they register on election day. That's 2% of the people. And our process does not prevent those people who do not meet our laws. For whatever reason, Representative Greenman, they do not meet our laws and they're voting. And that's the issue that I have, and I think that Minnesotans should have. But back to my question, Madam Chair, which is directed at the Legislative Auditor staff, why is it that of those people that register newly each year, the bulk of them are registering on election day rather than the rest of the year prior to election day? And if I could add to that,
Yes,
what are other states telling us? What are they doing?
Senator Truskowski, I've directed your question to Ms. De La Cueva.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Kelsey, for the question. I do wish to clarify before I get to your question that this table, Exhibit 2.5, includes only people who are newly registered from January 1st, 2024. I'm sorry, July 21st, 2024 through November 5th, 2024. The other 3.8 million or so people, who may have voted that day were already registered. So we're not talking about 2% of the people who were unverifiable. We're talking about 2% of the new registrants, and that's a much smaller proportion of all of the people who voted. To get to your...
Ms. De La Cueva, that was my question, of the newly registered people. These are new registrants. The bulk of them are on election day.
Ms. Munson-Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Jaskowski. What we were trying to indicate is it is just during that 3-month period. So this isn't the entire year of registrations. It is just during that 3-month period around the elections. So I wouldn't necessarily say that this is representative of all new registrations throughout an entire year. With the automatic voter registration evaluation that we'll be putting out in a couple of months here, we will have more information year-round about types of registrations for you.
Senator Truskowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'd ask the staff, what do we see in other states? Are other states operating in such a ridiculous manner as we are?
Well, how about, are they operating in the same manner?
How many, what are other states doing in terms
Ms.
of
De La
the
Cueva.
proportion of voters that are registered on election day
Thank you,
compared to
Senator
the
Truskowski.
rest of the year?
Ms. De La Cueva.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Kelsey. There are a handful of other states, and I believe we have them listed in a footnote in Chapter 1, that also allow election day registration. We did not do any comparison between states. I don't know how our proportions of registration types compare to those of other states, and we also did not do any research to determine why people registered with the method that they chose. So I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to provide much additional information for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Truskowski. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, trying to remember where we are. Thank you. So, I had finished going through this flow chart and was going to say that this population we analyzed, I originally said 211,000 people were in the population we looked at. For identity verification, we analyzed 156,800 of them because AVR applicants are already considered verified before they make it to OSS because they, by definition, have a driver's license number that would be used to verify their identity. And on the whole, as we've been talking about quite a lot already, page 25 has a chart, and on the whole, 99.9% of people passed identity verification in our analysis. What we did spend more time analyzing was we analyzed the transactions data that SVRS contains to determine the extent to which counties accurately assigned verification statuses and voter statuses as a result of the identity verification process. And we found there that 99.9% of the applicants were processed correctly. The vast majority of these applicants were verified automatically through DVS and Social Security Administration data, as I described on the previous slide. There were fewer than about 200 records for which we disagreed with the status determination or did not see evidence that the determination was accurate. I'll note that we didn't observe any important differences by county or region here. This is statewide. Exhibit 2.4 in our report and the surrounding text provide some more examples about why the sorts of issues that we saw, but I'll note that the possible errors we observed kind of went both ways. We saw some voter statuses that were activated without evidence that the individual had passed identity verification. And on the flip side, we saw some other voter registration records that were initially challenged appropriately because the person failed the identity verification, but then they were submitted through the process again, perhaps after adjusting their information, and they passed, but then they were not reactivated as they should have been. So those 200 records we found questionable, kind of had a couple of different issues going on. I would like to now switch gears to residency verification. And like the identity verification process, it starts with a new application that the county enters into SVRS to create a voter registration record. SVRS automatically sends a postal verification card, PVC. They send a PVC to the applicant, and this is a notice indicating the voter's name, address, precinct, and polling place. Postal verification cards are non-forwardable. The U.S. Postal Service must return the notice to the county if it cannot be delivered as addressed. When a notice is returned, the county challenges the record as with a reason of postal return. If, on the other hand, the PVC is delivered successfully to the applicant, the residency is considered verified and the voter status remains active. Our analysis of the residency verification process used a different subset of those 211,000 records. AVR folks are back in, but there's only 191,000 records in this set because individuals who are not yet active, that being pending 16 and 17-year-olds who pre-registered, as well as people who registered via AVR and still have the opportunity to opt out, they are not supposed to receive their PVC until their record becomes active. And we found here that 99% of the applications processed during this time period passed the residency verification process. And page 33 of the report has a table, just like the one we were looking at for identity verification, that breaks down them by method, the different passage rates. As we did for identity verification, we analyzed SVRS transactions data to determine the extent to which counties accurately assigned voter statuses as the result of residency verification process. We found that 99% of the applications were processed correctly. The vast majority of these applications did not require the county to make a decision. The PVC was delivered and the voter remained active without the county taking action. For 1% of records, we questioned the status determination. And again, we did not see patterns by county or region. These 2,400 cases were statewide. I'll offer a couple of examples, but you can see in 2.8, the exhibit 2.8, and the surrounding text, other examples of why somebody might have not, some of the issues that we saw the counties having with the verification process. So we observed voters challenged for postal returns without documentation that a postal return of a postal return date in SVRS. However, we cannot know whether the county's determination was accurate because the use of the SVRS form on which a county would record the date of a postal return is currently optional. So it is quite possible that someone received a returned PVC and challenged, and it was appropriate with it because they didn't have to fill out that form. We just can't know because the documentation is not there. On the flip, we also saw some cases on the reverse side. We saw cases of documented postal returns in the system for which the county did not appear to challenge the record. And finally, we saw cases where there did not appear to be a PVC sent when we thought that it should have. All right. I'm going to not exactly shift gears, but go sort of a different direction with residency verification. Statutes require that OSS submit an annual report to the legislature on the PVCs that were sent to Election Day registrants and were returned. This report must include, broken out by county, the number of notices returned as undeliverable, the reasons they were returned if the county could determine them, and the total number of individuals for whom the county does not receive or obtain satisfactory proof of an individual's eligibility to vote. We found that the report that OSS produces meets these requirements. However, we think that the report offers limited value for a couple of reasons. We think that the numbers reported under the category of no satisfactory proof of eligibility could easily be misinterpreted. This report provides the number of individuals for whom counties did not receive proof of eligibility through the postal verification process. This report should not be used to make broader statements about eligibility. Also, this report just does not include the number of Election Day registrants or per county or the number of PVCs sent, which makes it difficult to interpret the scope and scale of the numbers that are presented in the report. We recommend that the legislature clarify the purpose and requirements of post-election reporting on returned PVCs. The legislature should consider whether the current format provides the information they need. If the intent of the report is to examine voter eligibility broadly, this report shows only a small piece of the puzzle. OSS may be able to provide different information to the legislature about voter eligibility questions. All right, I'm now going to shift gears. We've been talking about application processing, but I'm going to move on to talk about how counties do ongoing maintenance of voter records. In Chapter 3 of our report, we discuss information that OSS receives from 4 different state agencies that give them information about voter eligibility. The Department of Corrections, DOC, provides to OSS on a monthly basis a list of all of the incarcerated individuals under its jurisdiction. The Department of Public Safety, DVS, provides a monthly list of non-citizens who have an active temporary stay. The State Court Administrator's Office, SCAO, provides a list of, provides on a rolling basis, so daily if needed, individuals who have been placed under guardianship and should be challenged, and also a list of similarly, they would provide records on individuals who have been removed from under guardianship. And finally, the Minnesota Department of Health provides a monthly list of individuals who have died in the state of Minnesota over the past month.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. I have a question specifically about public safety. So public safety provides a list of people who are here on temporary visas, here legally, with status. So is there any list of the people who are who are neither citizens nor here on temporary legal status? Is there any list that's sent over? Does public safety have that? Is there any way to distinguish? Because I think that's the issue. So, thank you.
Ms. Delacueva.
Madam Chair, Representative Anderson, thank you for the question. No, there is not a list of that sort. It is my understanding that DVS staff and their deputy registrars are not permitted to request citizenship affirming documentation. So there is no way, they do not have an ongoing list of people who are registered who are non-citizens if they do not also have a temporary stay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All right. So OSS uses the data that we discussed on the previous slide to identify registered voters whose status should be changed. It provides lists of registered voters, of these registered voters to counties, and we reviewed the data that these agencies, that all 4 agencies sent to OSS during the fall of 2024 to determine whether the counties appropriately updated the voter records. So during September of 2024, OSS used the DOC data to identify 59 newly incarcerated individuals who should have had their voter registration records challenged in SVRS. We found that 54% were challenged on time. The statutory limit is 7 days from when they received the list from OSS. 19% were challenged late, and the remaining 27% were not challenged during the period that we examined, and our data extended to the end of June 2025. OSS also uses the Department of Corrections data to determine which registered voters are no longer incarcerated. Among 39 individuals they identified, counties removed challenges on time for just over half of them. 44% had their challenges removed late, and then the remaining 5% did not have their challenge removed in the data that we examined. OSS uses SCAO data to identify 17 registered voters during the month of September who should have been challenged due to guardianship. The counties challenged all 17 of them. However, 4 of them they did challenge late. You'll note that I excluded from this table individuals whose rights had been restored. SCAO reported 2 of those during this time frame, but they were not already registered voters, so there was no change for the counties to make. All right, OSS used the October 2024 data from DVS to identify 1 non-citizen with an active temporary stay who also had a voter registration record. The county challenged that individual within 7 days as required. And then finally, the OSS uses Department of Health data to identify registered voters who have died, and they provide that information to the counties. Counties changed the voter status to deceased as required for 99.4% of these voters. Counties have 60 days to make the changes based on MDH's data, and all of the changes were made within that required time frame. I will note that the 17 cases for which the counties did not make the required change may or may not represent a county error. Counties could have reviewed the information that OSS provided and determined that the deceased individual was not actually a match for the registered voter. The same thing could also be the case for the DOC data. All right, so we recommend that the counties either update or document their rationale for not updating all voter registration records flagged by OSS using data from other state agencies. We believe, however, that OSS could help ensure counties do not miss individuals whose records should be updated by modifying the way that it provides that information, especially for DOC and DVS. For those lists, OSS currently includes only newly incarcerated individuals or individuals on DVS's data that newly match with the with the state voter registration system. We think that this could lead to counties overlooking individuals who should have been challenged. During the course of our evaluation, news broke about 1 individual who registered without being a citizen and was charged. That individual appeared on OSS's match list when the registration first occurred. And the county, for whatever reason, did not make challenge at that time. Had OSS listed the individual on subsequent match lists, the county might have caught its error more quickly. All right, now I'm going to shift gears to sort of my last topic for this presentation. Thank you for your patience and having me here. While counties do the bulk of updating voter registration records, OSS is responsible for inactivating voter registration records for individuals who have not voted over a certain period of time. However, federal law, state law, and OSS practice establish somewhat different criteria for when to inactivate a voter registration record. The Federal Help America Vote Act, or HAVA, allows a state to inactivate a registration record when the voter has missed 2 consecutive federal elections and has failed to respond to a notice about their impending inactivation. OSS maintains that Minnesota is exempt from this provision of law. State law requires that OSS inactivate voters who have not voted in 4 years, and state law does not have a requirement to send a notice to the individuals who are being inactivated. OSS inactivates individuals who have not voted or updated their registration in 4 years. Also, OSS does not send a notice prior to an inactivation. OSS explained that updating an address or a name is essentially re-registering, and that as such, they do not inactivate the voters until they have neither voted nor re-registered for 4 years. And I apologize that I forgot to advance the slides while that was going on. All right, so we recommend that the legislature consider revising the criteria for inactivating voter records. Given the different sets of criteria and the recent changes in voter registration laws, such as ABR, it may be a good time for the legislature to reconsider requiring inactivation, reconsider its requirement to inactivate voter registration records based only on 4 years of not voting. Consistent with OSS's interpretation, it may not be practical or desirable to inactivate an individual who hasn't voted but who has updated their record, since updating their record proactively would indicate that they have a desire to be registered and perhaps an intent to vote in the future. Further, we think it's unclear to what extent the federal inactivation requirements apply to Minnesota, given that Minnesota is exempt from portions of that federal law. However, we think it is worth considering sending a notice to individuals prior to inactivating them nonetheless. All right, that is the end of my presentation today. I really thank you for your time and attention, and we'll be happy to take more questions as needed.
Are there more questions for the auditor's office, or should we move forward to hearing from the Secretary of State's office at this time? We'll do that. Thank you very much. You can tell that this is a topic of not only great interest, but great importance to all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'd now welcome the Secretary of State, Mr. Steve Simon, and Paul Linnell, the Director of Elections. Welcome to the Legislative Audit Commission's meeting, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve Simon, Minnesota Secretary of State. It's an honor to be here with the Legislative Audit Commission to discuss the OLA's report on Minnesota's voter registration system. I was a member of the LAC when I served in the Minnesota House, so I understand and I appreciate the care that all of you take in selecting topics for OLA reports and in reviewing the conclusions in those reports for potential legislative action. I want to thank the OLA for its professionalism, its thoroughness, its attention to detail, and its remarkable ability to get up to speed on a complex area of policy. At all times, the OLA had complete access to everything about our voter registration system, the data and the details of all kinds. Under Minnesota law, nothing was off limits to the OLA, and we tried to be as quick and as transparent as we could possibly be in fulfilling OLA requests. I also need to thank our staff at the Office of Secretary of State. This was, to put it mildly, a labor-intensive process. Our team spent literally hundreds of hours. When I first wrote this, I put in dozens, and someone on our staff corrected me. It was not dozens, it was literally hundreds of hours during a very busy time, finding specific data and answering specific questions requested by the OLA team, all the way up until last week, in fact. I don't need to remind this committee that the statewide primary election is only 34 days away, and that voters across the state literally have ballots in their hands right now. And of course, the general election, with its even greater responsibilities and pressures, is only 118 days away. So I'm grateful to the best Secretary of State team in America for shining once again. This is a positive report, which reflects positively on Minnesota's elections and which shows that our voter registration system is working well. We're pleased with the OLA's conclusions that, number one, our office provides appropriate procedures for counties regarding voter registration duties and responsibilities. Number two, our office provides the counties the data and tools they need to process voter registrations. Number three, that our office has made progress on the work of modernizing the statewide voter registration system, or SVRS, which is the federally mandated electronic system that operates as a central hub for county-based voter registration responsibilities. Overall, our mission at our office is to ensure that our elections are fair, accurate, honest, and secure. We don't pass the laws that govern our elections, but we do implement them along with local governments at the county, city, and township level. As the report repeatedly mentions, our office does not have legal authority to enforce county implementation of voter registration requirements, but we are partners with one another. We each have a role to play, and we each do our best to have each other's backs. So let me put that model into action right now. While the OLA report identifies areas for improvement by counties, I do ask members of this commission to remember that of Minnesota's 87 counties, only 9 counties, 9 out of 87, have full-time, year-round, elections-only departments. Now, the professionals who administer elections in all 87 counties are equally skilled and conscientious, but in the vast majority of counties, county election administrators have other duties in addition to elections, sometimes property tax collection, sometimes inspection requirements, and sometimes even ditch and drainage work. In the last few years, have seen significant turnover among county election administrators. In addition to that, counties and our office have implemented several large-scale legislative changes over the past couple of years. These are changes that we believe were beneficial to Minnesota voters and brought Minnesota up to speed with many of our peer states. But, as this report reflects, it did increase the workload for county and state officials, and it was a significant amount of change. I would say once-in-a-generation type of change in some areas, and that happened in a very short period of time. Overall, however, we're blessed in Minnesota to have a team of true professionals administering elections at the county level throughout the state. They really are excellent and effective partners for us, and more importantly, they really serve the voters very, very well. While this report does not seek to compare Minnesota to other states, I do want to note 2 things just for context. Number one, Minnesota's voter registration system is generally more complex and thorough than in other states because we update our lists more regularly than most other states. Part of this is due to the flexibility that we have as a state exempt from certain restrictions in the National Voter Registration Act. But part of this is also due to our participation with over half the states in the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC. On a monthly basis, we securely exchange and compare data with other ERIC member states, U.S. Postal Service national change of address reports, and Social Security death data. Several list maintenance reports are generated from this data matching, which are used to update voter records and ensure that our voter rolls remain current and accurate. Number 2, Minnesota has recently enjoyed praise on a national level for the overall administration of our elections. Every 2 years, MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, issues what it calls its Election Performance Index, EPI, which bills itself as the premier assessment tool to evaluate election administration across the United States. It compares all 50 states on the basis of 19 criteria, including several related to the effectiveness of their voter registration systems. I'm pleased to tell you that in the 2026 report issued just a few weeks ago, Minnesota was the #1 state in America for overall election administration performance. I'll note that the top performing states have secretaries of state from both major political parties. Back to the topic at hand. Today's OLA report shows that Minnesota's voter registration system is fundamentally sound. While there is room for improvement, as always, the underlying system should inspire confidence. With that, I'm happy to introduce our Minnesota Elections Director, Paul Linnell, for further comment.
Welcome to the hearing. If you'd identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Paul Linnell, and I'm the Director of Elections with the Office of the Minnesota Secretary of State.
Mr. Linnell.
Thank you. And thank you, Secretary Simon, and to the members of the Legislative Audit Commission for the opportunity to speak with you today, and to the Office of the Legislative Auditor for their work on this report. I'll now walk through the office's comments in response to each of the key recommendations that were included in the summary of the report. Quickly, before diving into the recommendations, I'd like to note that Minnesota has long been a leader with its voter registration system technology. In 1990, Minnesota was the first state to develop an interactive voter registration database that all counties could access using connected online terminals. We're also proud to have built a state-of-the-art updated statewide voter registration system, or SVRS, following the passage of the Help America Vote Act in 2002. As this report reflects, SVRS continues to work very well in providing the necessary tools for election officials to comply with the many state and federal legal requirements associated with voter registration and voter list maintenance. The previous 2018 voter registration audit included a recommendation to begin to modernize SVRS. And as noted in this report, there have been significant improvements to the system in support of this recommendation, primarily focusing on system performance, security, and compliance with new legal requirements. But there is still more work to be done to build out the next iteration of our state's voter registration system. The next phase of the modernization effort will emphasize updating system code, improving the user experience, and building in system enhancements to allow for work to be completed more efficiently and more effectively. OSS elections and IT staff have undertaken planning and requirements gathering over the past year and will soon be entering the next phase that will include convening user groups. We look forward to partnering with counties and other SVRS users to benefit from their insight and expertise to help shape the best possible voter registration system. Now to the recommendations. Beginning with the first recommendation that counties should process all voter registration applications within the timeframes that are established by law.
Excuse me for a second. I just want to draw members' attention that the recommendations are following the report, if you want to follow along with his comments, and also look at the recommendations and their response. Mr. Linnell.
Yes, thank you. We agree with this first recommendation and are glad to see that the report found that our office provides procedures and guidance to counties consistent with this recommendation and that counties are largely complying with these deadlines. Our office provides detailed guidance around the 20-day registration cutoff before each election, reminding counties that all records received prior to the deadline must be processed to ensure that the rosters on election day are accurate and reflect all eligible voters registered before that cutoff. We will continue to work with counties to determine if there are any improvements that can be made to the system or to guidance documents to further ensure compliance with meeting this legal requirement. The next recommendations paired together state that counties should follow state law and OSS guidance when processing returned postal verification cards, or PVCs, and accurately document all returned PVCs in SVRS. Our office again agrees with these recommendations. And as the report notes, the OLA was able to verify compliance. Note that there are other pieces of returned election mail that are tracked separately and have their own unique processing requirements. For example, absentee or mail ballots. So because a county is not required to document the rationale in the system, and because there are other pieces of returned election mail that may result in a challenge to a voter record, we believe it's likely that the majority of those, less than 1%, were handled appropriately and in accordance with the law. However, we nevertheless agree with the recommendation that requiring documentation for return PVCs, including the return date and reason for return, could aid in ensuring proper handling of those PVCs and future validation of those records. Our office will engage in a discussion with counties and legislative leaders about whether that should be legally required, and if so, what information should be required to be documented in the system. We'll also explore with counties what type of reporting form SVRS would help to improve PVC processing, as recommended by the OLA, and we'll commit to developing such a report as part of our work to modernize SVRS. The fourth recommendation is that the...
Excuse me. Senator Barr, did you have a question or... Okay, on all of them. If members have questions on the response to the recommendations as we go along, please raise your hand and ask a question as we go along. Mr. Linnell.
Thank you. The fourth recommendation is that the legislature should clarify the purpose and requirements of post-election reporting of returned PVCs. Our office agrees with this recommendation. Our office provides a significant amount of post-election data, both voluntarily and through reporting that's required by both state and federal law. In fact, the MIT Elections Performance Index mentioned by Secretary Simon, Minnesota received the highest possible score for data completeness, which is a measure of the data that the state provides as part of required federal post-election data reporting. The PVC report is currently a labor-intensive process for both the OSS and county staff. We agree that in its current form, the report meets the statutory requirements, but does not add much by way of value. We look to engaging with both counties and the legislature to attempt to clarify the purpose of the report and identify ways to improve its utility for those that wish to use it. The fifth recommendation states that counties should either update or document their rationale for not updating all voter registration records flagged by the OSS for a disqualifying condition. We agree with this recommendation, along with the corresponding recommendation that's in the body of the report, that the OSS should modify monthly match reports on disqualifying conditions to align them with the format that is used for processing data from other agencies, such as the Department of Health reports on deceased individuals. As the recommendation notes, counties not taking action on a record is not necessarily indicative that they did not review the report and that the voter is not eligible. There are instances where further review of a potential match may indicate that the record should not have been challenged or it was a false positive in the matching process. However, the recommendation to document the rationale when a flagged record is not updated would be helpful to ensure that this information is captured in the system. This recommendation pairs well with the planned next phase of SVRS modernization. We will work closely with counties to determine the most efficient and effective way to improve these reports to ensure legal compliance and ease of administration. While the OSS is working with counties on the best way to improve these reports, we will also resend guidance to counties reminding them of the process currently required to identify potentially disqualifying conditions, and will emphasize the importance of these monthly match reports. The sixth recommendation is that counties should send a notice to all individuals whose rights to vote have been restored as required by Minnesota rules. Again, we agree with this recommendation, and we believe that this will be fully implemented by counties following rule changes that became effective June 1st, 2026, and the updated guidance recently distributed to counties by our office. We will also note that in addition to the notice sent from county elections officials, persons whose voting rights have been restored also receive notification about their voting rights from the Department of Corrections upon leaving incarceration. Recommendation 7 states that the legislature should consider revising the criteria for inactivating voter registration records. Our office agrees with this recommendation and believes that the legal requirements for inactivating voter registration records for a lack of voting-related activity would benefit from further clarification. The approach to inactivating voter records if the voter has not voted for 4 years, nor re-registered to vote during that time, has been in place in Minnesota for over 20 years. Since then, however, Minnesota's voter registration system has benefited from the addition of several new data sources that help with maintaining accurate voter rolls. We believe that Minnesota's current approach complies with both state law and meets requirements in federal law, which gives states like Minnesota, who are exempt from the NVRA, substantial flexibility to craft state law requirements and develop list maintenance procedures. We also agree that it is appropriate for the legislature to weigh the different policy considerations that would support changing the current process for inactivating voters for a lack of voting-related activity. Our office will commit to working with legislative leaders on this topic in the upcoming legislative session. Finally, although not included in the summary page of the recommendations, our office agrees with the recommendations in Chapter 3 of the report that are directed to the OSS. Specifically, the recommendation that the OSS should establish guidance directing county election staff to immediately send the office copies of their voting-related referrals to the county attorney, and that county should send those at the same time to the OSS as required by the law. Our office does currently receive reports from county attorneys' offices about the outcome of these investigations, and many, if not most, of these investigations stem from data that is provided from the OSS to the counties. However, to meet this legal requirement, our office has provided updated guidance to counties about the importance of providing us with a copy of all voting-related referrals at the time that they are sent to the county attorney. We'll incorporate this into our training materials and county administration guidance as well. In closing, once again, we extend our appreciation to the Legislative Auditor for their in-depth review of Minnesota's voter registration system. We look forward to working closely with our county elections partners and the legislature to implement the recommendations contained in this report as we look to improve our nation-leading voter registration system. And with that, we'll stand for questions or pass it over to Michael Stahlberger with the counties.
Thank you, Mr. Linnell. I think we'll proceed to questions, Mr. Secretary, if that's okay. And to do this in an orderly way, I wonder if we would first have questions about the recommendations and then have questions about any other part of the report. Senator Barr. Okay. Any questions about the recommendations and the Secretary's response? Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question about SVRS, because I know in 2018 that was a piece of it was updating, and Mr. Lindell, you acknowledged that sort of the next steps. I'm wondering, as we think about it going into the legislative session, what are the pieces you need to implement the recommendations, specifically as we think about sort of modernizing SVRS? I know a lot of the documentation pieces actually rely on and require a sort of more user-friendly documentation system, and I know that that's one of the things the counties wrote in their letter. Are there, other than, I assume that there's a resource question, but what are the things you need from us to implement those?
Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Greenman. That's a good question. This is an ongoing process. There's a reason why it takes so long. There's just a lot of moving parts in SVRS, and it changes all the time, and we have to be able to adapt. I'm going to defer, though, to Mr. Linnell about the specifics because he knows a lot more than I do about that.
Mr. Linnell.
Madam Chair, Representative, thank you for the question. I think some of the challenges with modernizing and updating the system also rely on it needing to continue to function in its current form. And as the system has needed to change to meet new requirements, add some of those security features, as the team of developers has worked, it's a matter of prioritization and adding to that team, getting the resources that can both keep the existing house functioning, but also start the remodel so that we can continue to move forward. And I do feel confident that over the last year we have made substantial progress in that regard. And there may be some asks as we continue to drive that forward and have a better sense of what the timeline and the needs will be to actually get the modernized system with the updated coding and everything across the finish line and bring those asks to the legislature.
Thank you. Before I call on you gentlemen, we passed a lot of money to support updating the very outdated technology in the Department of Human Services. How would you compare the current technology that the Secretary of State's office uses as to the upgrades that have been deemed necessary and imperative in other agencies and departments in state government? How far ahead of you are you compared to other states, if you want to go into that? Or is it an ongoing process that you're constantly revising the technology and taking advantage of improvements that are being made in the whole field of technology? Or are we on course? Where are we with regard to our technology, the accuracy, the reliability of it, and the ability for it not to hallucinate? Mr. Secretary or Mr. Linnell?
Well, Madam Chair, I'll just say very generally, and then I will hand it over to Mr. Linnell, that we feel very good about the technology. I don't have the expertise that many of you here do on those other agencies. I read, just as a news consumer, about some of the data technology. We don't really have that issue. We really try to stay on the cutting edge. But I'm going to hand it off to Mr. Linnell, and he can say a little bit more about the technology.
Mr. Linnell, if you'd care to comment.
Madam Chair, I think the voter registration system, the technology itself is sound, and that the improvements that have been made over the last several years have ensured that we continue to both meet legal requirements but also capacity needs. The system as originally designed more than 21 years ago, we like to say it's of drinking age at this point. A lot of things that were layered onto the system, such as absentee balloting, soon to be early voting, new features that were not part of the original design. And there certainly are elements of the system that are getting towards, end of life in terms of the technology, the code that it was built on. So it's very much a priority that while the system right now is sound, and I think the report reflects that it's meeting the needs and providing what it needs to do both for meeting legal requirements and for county users, a next generation system would go a long way towards easing the process and lowering potential errors from taking place in the very small cases where they may be in the current context. Compared to other states, since I believe you addressed that question as well, this is a point in time where a number of other states across the country have or are in the process of modernizing their voter registration systems, in part because we were all on the same federal requirement with the Help America Vote Act in originally gaining our systems. I think Minnesota does have some advantages, having built our system in-house, having an excellent team of developers, some of whom have been with SVRS since the very beginning. That gives us flexibility and expertise that many states do not have the benefit of and need to lean on vendors that present their own benefits, but also a host of challenges as well.
Thank you. Going back to questions on the recommendations, Representative Quam, was your comments about the recommendations, and then we'll go to Senator Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. And on the SVRS, hopefully you're not still in COBOL, snowball time frame. But in order to assist in that updating, even though statute says that elected officials are supposed to be able to have some access, it'd be nice if the chairs of the appropriate committees had visibility to examples of that database and the systems, so we could more appropriately put into code the assistance to be able to update it into the queries and other things would be needed. So I would invite the secretary or you to have some of those conversations and have some meetings that would allow that, so the legislature can be part of bringing that change. Are there any issues with that database? Back in 2018, after the first audit, during that summer, I sent letters out to the Secretary of State and the largest counties and then regional counties about the updating, correcting, and et cetera of the data. And what I received back was, just like in this audit, the Secretary of State informed it's the counties that are in this responsibility, but the counties replied that they really weren't all of them doing it because the database was continually changing and there were issues. It'd be nice to understand the different things that were implemented to improve it for the counties between that point and now, because I don't think I noticed in my review of the audit the responses to some of the questions that came up at that time, because that'll help us understand how we can go to the next level and improve that activity for all the counties, especially those that don't have the specialists. So I want to thank you for this, your discussion on that, and for the future discussions that will make this even better in the future. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Quam. Senator Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned that you use the ERIC system to bounce rolls back and forth between other states. Could you tell me how many states are enrolled in ERIC?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Barr. I think, someone can correct me, I think we're up to 28 now. Is that right?
I can confidently say it's at
Mr.
least 20.
Linnell.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Sure.
I confidently say it's at 25 states in the District of Columbia and a few that are in the process of joining in short order.
There are two that, Madam Chair, if I may, that
Mr. Secretary.
there are two states that I just don't know for sure whether they are fully joined, but they're in the process. They may be, New York and Virginia, were the two I'm thinking of, but.
Senator Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what are we doing to verify with the other 22 to 24 states? What's the process we're using to bounce our voter rolls against those other states? And just as a quick sidebar, do you happen to know if Wisconsin is part of ERIC or not?
Mr. Linnell.
Madam Chair, Senator, thank you for the question. Yes, Wisconsin is a member of ERIC. And certainly we would love to see all 50 states as a part of this system, and the numbers previously were higher. There is requirements under law for states to send information when a voter registers to vote and provides their previous residence in another state. Those are sent by each state to that former state on a either rolling basis or one-off correspondence that's sent. But it does rely on the voter, and more often than not, the last thing on an individual's mind when they're moving out of state is, hey, I need to go cancel my voter registration. That's why ERIC is such a beneficial program, in part because of that data matching from both voter registration databases as well as Department of Motor Vehicle data, so that when those moves take place, we can get our voter rolls updated as timely as possible. And we do take those reports from ERIC on a monthly basis to ensure that that data gets to the counties as frequently as possible.
Senator Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a couple of things here. So when you get your monthly report from ERIC, let's just say we have in-person reporting in November. I'm going to use the first of the month. I don't know when you receive the report, but let's just say you receive it on the 1st of November. You have in-person voting on the day of election, this time 10th of November, I believe. What do we do if somebody, I'm going to use a really just obscure example here, and I'm not saying anybody's doing this, but somebody lives in Hudson, Wisconsin, or they graduated high school in Hudson or just across the river somewhere in Wisconsin. They're going to school at the U of M. They can commute back and forth to same day register here in Minnesota. They can present a student ID and vote. We have pop-up polling places on campus. Is there any way that the ERIC system is going to, or is there another system that will catch somebody who voted in Wisconsin because they were 18, they registered to vote in Wisconsin, they live in Wisconsin, but they come to Minnesota, present a student ID, and vote here in Wisconsin? Is there any apparatus that would catch that?
Mr. Linnell.
Madam Chair, Senator Barr, thank you for the question. On the front end of that question was around timing of when records are processed and getting those up to date. There are some carve-outs both in Minnesota state law and then in federal law for states that are covered by the MVRA that are sort of freeze periods where you can't process things that close to an election. What I would say is if subsequently that information comes through and suggests that a voter moved out of state but then voted, that would be something that would catch the eye of the county when processing that record and would likely review that to determine what may have taken place with that, if it's just change of address data. On the back end, ERIC member states do have the ability to take a report that's called a voter participation report that does comparisons across states. Under current state law, Minnesota is not permitted to exchange that report, but it is something that I think would be open for discussion with the legislature about utility of that report.
Senator Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that's something that we should definitely pursue. Obviously, we won't catch it we won't be able to pass anything before the next election, but that's something we should probably pursue before the 28 elections take place. Just to prevent that kind of thing, we should see if somebody did, and then it would give us our Department of Justice, more tools to go out and perpetrate the fraudsters so that we know one person, one vote, not one person, two votes, or something like that. And then the other question I have is the reliance upon the mail system for verification. I have personally seen the voter registration cards show up at an address. They were delivered for somebody that has never lived at that address. I have a friend of mine built a house. She's lived in that house for 20 plus years, almost 30 years now. The last election, after the 24 election, she got a card in the mail for somebody that has never, ever lived at that address. She has no idea who this person is, but it was her address. The address was correct on the card. So we know somebody registered to vote at her address. Whether they cast a vote or not, I don't know. But she did receive a voter registration card in the mail that has never, for somebody who never lived there. So when we send the cards, I guess this would be my recommendation. When we send the cards, we're not requiring anything to come back. The postman can just deliver the card. It's the right address, but you don't know if the person lives there or not because maybe somebody's had a domestic issue and they're in the process of moving and they're staying at a friend's house. They wanted to vote, to participate. They did vote, and then we send them the card to that address, but they don't actually live there or didn't live there, or you have the fraudsters that might be trying to do something like that. So my suggestion would be if we're going to use a voter registration card as a verification tool, maybe there should be what they would call in cyber a double verification or a two-factor authentication. Sign it and send the card back. And if you don't receive the card back, then it's removed. That voter is removed from the voter rolls on the same-day registration or anytime you register to vote. You send the card, but how about we get it back and verify that you are actually who you say you are, the signatures match. Yep, this is me, this is my address, I live here, and make sure we have only the accurate people that live at that address if we're going to rely on the voter registration system.
Thank you, Senator Barr. Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Chair Rest. So I guess you state that it's a very positive report, and I think that's probably in the eye of the beholder. So for myself, 99.9% accuracy, of course that sounds like a good number, but the 0.1% of 3.8 million voters is still 3,800 inaccuracies or votes that are not correct, which certainly has the potential to change the outcomes in elections. But I'm going to go back to Secretary Simon. Before I was elected to this office, I was a county commissioner, and I had you at my county board, and we were going over election processes and how to manage that. And your specific statement dovetails exactly with what you've said today, was that the question was, do we verify every vote or do we count every vote? And your response was, count every vote, which kind of resulted with some gasps from the people in the audience there in Winona County. So first of all, where did the policy come from to count every vote before verifying every vote? And secondly, do you think that should be changed?
Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Jacob. I do remember that meeting, right? I would say that we're really looking at federal and state law, and it's always a balance, right? There are a lot of reasons why we don't have, for example, provisional ballots. Representative Quam and I have gone back and forth on this. We just respectfully disagree. We were exempt from the requirement that some states have to have provisional ballots. I think that's kind of what you're getting at. I don't want to speak for you, but maybe that's what you're alluding to. And if it is, you can look at provisional ballots as both a sword and a shield, offense or defense. And provisional ballots were originally meant, at least in my judgment, to be sort of pro-voter defense. So, and I think Congress saw it the same way. So that, for example, I'll give you an example. Let's say that someone signed up, there were some college kids with a clipboard and a summer festival in August, and they signed up to register to vote. And then they show up in November at the place they're supposed to vote, and they're not on the list. And they said, well, I remember, I registered to vote, I signed up, I signed that clipboard, I even remember where it was, I had an ice cream cone in my hand, and why am I not on the list? In that case, Congress seems to have said, provisional balloting is a good pro-voter thing, because it's not their fault. Maybe some college kid stuck it in the trunk of their car and never delivered it, right? So you should get an opportunity to vote. But what Congress said was states that have same-day voter registration, like ours, you don't need that. Because in the hypothetical that I just talked about, someone shows up, they signed a clipboard in August, they show up on game day, on election day, they're not on the list. We have an out for that. We have a remedy for that, which is you can register game day as long as you can show you are who you say you are and you live where you say you live. And so, at least my own fear is that what could happen with the provisional ballot regime is that people just aren't going to bother, right? If you do that, then people are going to see all the results are recorded. You know by breakfast the next morning who won every election. And people are probably just not going to bother. And there are studies that show that they don't bother because usually the provisional ballot bills that I've seen around the Minnesota legislature would require someone within some number of days to show up at their county seat and do something or say something or show something. And so it's a balance, and reasonable people can disagree, but I think our system has struck that balance well, in my opinion. I don't know, Mr. Linnell, do you have, you don't have to, but if you have any.
No, Madam Chair,
Mr. Linnell.
I think I would certainly agree with everything the Secretary said, and also just kind of the finer point of the questions around a voter status and being challenged just being something that there is a question. It doesn't suggest that they are ineligible, and in fact they have that process to be able to swear under oath, and then there are specific steps that are outlined in statute and rule for counties to be able to refer those for review in cases where there are questions that remain, both about pre-registered voters and for election day registrants. So it's not just that we take them at their word and their vote is cast and that's that. If there's still any question, there is an investigation process to review that and refer that for potential prosecution.
Thank you, Ms. Linnell. Senator, anything further? Representative Jacob? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair Russ. I think the concerns come with that. The ballots are always counted before they're verified. So once they're cast, they're counted, if they're allowed to be cast, and the verification process comes later. So, I mean, that's clearly an issue to my constituents, and I'll back up to, even at the very best count here, 99.9%, a great number, but still 3,800 votes undisputed that we know are somehow inaccurate or something going on with those votes. That's not a clear win to my constituents.
Senator Dibble.
Thanks. Well, I think it bears noting there are two major stories in the paper over the past 2 days about how the federal administration has been withholding funds, trying to put pressure on our state and the proper functioning of our election system. And so I just wanted to make note of that, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
And I wanted to take the other perspective in that 99.9% is pretty good. And all the reporting that I've read on these articles in the past couple of days, the clear and unequivocal statement is that improper voting is exceedingly rare, de minimis in the state of Minnesota, and oftentimes is detected and remedied through prosecution and the like. I wanted to give the Secretary of State the opportunity to expand a little bit on the good news that I thought I heard, which was that Minnesota was deemed the most accurate in an MIT analysis. But what was that exactly, and what does that help us know?
Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Dibble. Thanks for the question. Yeah, this is the MIT Elections Performance Index. It comes out every 2 years. They evaluate 50 states based on 19 criteria, some of which deal with the topic today, which are voter registration. As Mr. Linnell noted in his remarks, one subcategory where we were #1 in the country had to do with the richness or the fullness of the data that we require, that we provide, I should say, to counties so that they can perform their functions really well. So we're really proud of that. I will say the competitor in me was shaking my fist a couple different election cycles. One time we were #2 in the country behind Vermont. Another time we were #2 in the country behind North Dakota. But this time we're #1, and we're gratified by that. And as I said, if you look at the list, it favors so-called red states, so-called blue states, states with different secretaries of state of various political parties, so there's no discernible political lean to this, and we're very proud of that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll just also note for the record that if there is any law breaking going on, it's going on the part of the federal government, which has been shown now several times by several court decisions and efforts to thwart the proper administration of elections at the state and local level, sending investigators into election centers in Georgia and the like, and also illegally withholding funds and trying to cast doubt and aspersions on the confidence of our voting system, with a goal that I can only guess is to reduce the level of confidence and suppress both access to elections and voting, and or depress people and put them in a position of not wanting to vote because of having those doubts. I don't know why we're not here thanking the auditor for finding the small problems that there are, thanking the Secretary of State for being responsive to those, but if we have these kinds of findings that approach the purity test of ivory soap, unlike previous audits, this would be a unified, very, very positive hearing overall, but clearly something else is going on here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dibble. Representative Guam.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and adding some clarifying to the recent comments. One, the trivialness of registration issues, et cetera. Again, going back to what was part of previous audits, and the one that was given the spring of 2018 on the HAVA required site, that election cycle had over 16,000 bad registrations flagged. And if you look at the flow chart, that is after several other things have been done to clear out. So it's a smaller portion of the ones get to there. And the thing about there aren't any problems, well, actually, there are multiple convictions of voter registration fraud in Minnesota across about a dozen different counties that had some entity paying multiple people giving them a list and paying them to register people across these counties. There were convictions. Those were actually strong enough to where they admitted they were guilty. And I think if I was in the DOJ, I'd be curious about when that investigation went on, there's additional information that they had, and they wanted to find out how extensive it was. I understand there's a strong push, this is private data. Well, the vast majority of the types of private data that were being requested already have been for many, many years supplied to the HAVA required SSA site. So those types of data are already being provided, and I think probably a few hundred per election cycle to that site. The issue, the driver's license is also a different type of data that's not submitted to that site. However, it was hinted about ERIC, but there is a national driver's license database that states and federal government entities have access to. So all the types of data in SR or SVRS, the private data, Social Security, name, address, driver's license, etc., are already part of databases being shared and information being shared that's accessible. The only difference is who's actually signed up. I do have a question for the Secretary of State. Is it true being a non-citizen doesn't disqualify you from voting in Minnesota? Madam Chair.
Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I was just following the double negative. I'll state it. Yes, you can't vote if you're a citizen. That's true.
Madam Chair.
Representative Quam.
The intent was, what had earlier been stated, is that if you're a non-citizen, that doesn't disqualify you. Therefore, non-citizens can vote in the state of Minnesota, and they are not flagged or checked or not allowed to. They're not told you can't vote. Is that correct?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Secretary.
Madam Chair, no, that's not correct.
Madam Chair,
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The auditor said that there wasn't anything in Minnesota law preventing non-citizens from voting. And there weren't checks and balances. So I'm surprised that there is that delta in the clarification, because if there is no process to verify citizenship for people that are registering, now there is a verification for the small quantity that goes to the HAVA SSA site, because that was designed federally to protect the voter rolls. But in the previous boxes before you get to that site, which most of the other ones stop before they get to the HAVA site, there is, what I've been told and fed back from multiple discussions, is there's nothing that verifies or checks citizenship of all the voters. So a non-citizen would not be flagged unless it got to the HAVA SSA site. Madam Chair.
Mr. Secretary.
Madam Chair, Representative Quam, I just think we have a different view on this. I didn't understand or hear the auditor or her team to say what you heard, but no, we have multiple checks in the system. I think, and I don't want to speak for her or her team, I think what they were maybe alluding to was there is no master list nationally of U.S. citizens. It doesn't exist. A lot of people are surprised by that, but there is no master list. So you have to piece it together from other sources. And we do our best working with those other sources to flag and screen and filter for citizens. But there is no master list, if that's what you mean. There is no one definitive list of everyone on here is a U.S. citizen. That has never been the case in U.S. history, as far as I know.
Representative Quam, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'd be interested to know, you made a comment about 16,000 people who were Minnesotans, or maybe they're not Minnesotans, but who attempted to vote. Is that what you said? And if you'd repeat that statement, what's the source that I could rely on that had happened?
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
What court?
It's not a court. It is publicly accessible database that was generated by the Help America Vote Act. And during the 2018 audit hearing in I think it was the Government Ops Committee, it came up that the auditors knew nothing about these over 16,000 bad flagged registrations by the HAVA SSA site during that election cycle window.
In Minnesota?
In Minnesota. And that, I mean, you can go back and see the video, unless they no longer have it. And I believe I was the one that brought it up during the hearing, because the numbers in the audit didn't match up with what I had seen in the public record. And so you can go to, I will find the link and I will send it to you. I've shared it with previous committees of where you can go and you can check on any of the states, because all the states are required to use this if there's not certain bits of, the previous verification or certain parts of documentation, there are problems with the registration to verify. That was the 2016 was over 16,000. The 2018 election cycle was over 15,000. I'm not sure how many in this past election cycle were also flagged. But again, this is public record, and it's been presented before legislative committees in the past.
Auditor Randall, can you enlighten us about these fraudsters and why are they not in prison?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Judy Randall, Legislative Auditor, just back up here. I don't know if I can answer that question, but I did want to.
You don't have to answer that question.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Answer the other question.
I wanted to draw the committee's attention back to the report on pages 26 through 28, because we took a deep dive at these checks against the Social Security Administration to look at more deeply at the question that Representative Quam has raised related to the transactions against the Social Security Administration. So what we did is we looked specifically at the number of pings, if you will, against the SSA database that occurred in September of 2024. And during that month, there were about 22,000 total, I'm calling them pings, against the Social Security Administration. So if you can recall back to our flow chart, first there's the DBS match. If that doesn't come through, then it goes to the Social Security Administration to see if there's an exact match there. So we did that September 24, there were about 22,000 that then went to the Social Security Administration. That actually represented about 17,000 individuals, because sometimes, as Representative Greenman had noted, if there's a missing hyphen or an apostrophe, or we have an example on page 27, actually using Richard and Rick as the example, where this is, we changed some of the details to protect somebody, but this is an actual example from September of 24, where one individual's records was pinged against the Social Security Administration database 4 different times because some numbers got transposed, he used Richard or Rick and didn't know, and then eventually, yes, this person got cleared. So the 16,000 number is the number of transactions. That's the number that Representative Quam is talking about from 2018. That's comparable to the 22,000 transactions here, but it represents a smaller number of individuals. And then, we took a deep dive into looking at how the Secretary of State's office and counties handled all of those transactions. And as you can see in the finding on page 27, we found that they appropriately handled all but 27 of the almost 22,000 transactions. And on page 28, there's a really quite detailed flow chart that has very precise numbers, and you can imagine we triple checked these to really identify how these different transactions were handled, whether the county handled them correctly, how many of them were just kind of automatically matched, done. Those are the easy bucket. The 1,491 where there wasn't a match found, what happened there? Almost 1,300 of them were never registered. Okay, so now we're down to 194 of them, where the counties now then have to get involved and make decisions. And so you can follow that through and then ultimately see how they were registered and what notations were on the voter roster. So even if they failed that Social Security check, if there are other ways to verify them, they can still move forward, or if not, they can be on the roster but as challenged, and then they have to go through additional process.
Thank you. Thank you,
Madam Chair.
Ms. Randall.
Madam Chair, too.
If you just wait a second.
Oh, certainly, Madam Chair.
Ms. Randall, did you have any further comment about the issues that Representative Quam raised?
Not at this time, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there an explanation for the 1,297 online transactions not registered, no voter? Is that means that there were mistakes by the personnel running the systems. In other words, they incorrectly recorded the wrong data when they're registering, as in when you're checking the registration versus that site, you have to enter the data. So the faulty data, the percentage of faulty entries by personnel working on elections, is that 1,297 faulty data entries?
Ms. Randall, and then I'll ask Mr. Linnell if he has any further comment. Ms. Randall?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Quam. Those are online applications, so that means the applicant themselves entered in incorrect information. Let me say it this way. They entered in information that could not be matched with the Social Security Administration, understanding that there's no partial matches, it has to be exact, and again, we get into other issues with hyphens and things like that.
Madam Chair?
Representative Quam?
What I'm referring to says no voter registration record in SVRS. And if they did online registration, they entered the data, doesn't that data go to the SVRS database?
Mr. Linnell?
Madam Chair, if I can speak to two different requirements that exist in state law that result in two different ways in which the SSA database gets pinged. So when a voter is registering online, the state law requires that there be a match against the Department of Public Safety's data or the Social Security Administration's data. So it is the applicant themselves that is providing their data on an online application. And before that ever goes to SVRS, it goes directly to that database to be matched. And if it's not matched, it doesn't get sent on to SVRS for registration. So oftentimes, and we're able to view reports of these failed verifications to see a voter with a hyphenated or multiple last names will try these different variations as the example notes within the book. So that actually increases the number of non-matches that we might have, in part because of that requirement that we verify before it's ever added and registered in SVRS. So as you see the no match found, the majority of those, the 1,297, are applicants and the data they've provided directly versus the 194 that are actually within SVRS. And the one other thing I will note is that in the month that was surveyed, September of 2024, and again, as Representative Quam noted, this data is all publicly available, Minnesota actually had the highest match rate with the HAV database, in part because we have developed as effective as matching protocols as possible to provide variations of those hyphenated and challenging names. And we are consistently among the top states of the 45 or so that are required to send their data to the database. There's a handful that get full Social Security numbers and don't need to, under federal law, send that data over, but we are consistently among the top states in terms of those matches.
Thank you, Mr. Linnell. Representative Quam, may I go on, or do you have other questions?
I think that probably, no, that did answer that additional question. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Representative Quam, I'm going to call on Senator Coran, and then Ms. Greenman, and then we're going to hear from the counties.
Thank you.
Senator Coran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Simon or Mr. Linnell, back to Senator Barr kind of went down the ERIC system. I thought the last time I read the ERIC system that I thought was we were providing information monthly, they were providing it twice a year. Is it now, and again, it was probably 2 years ago that I read the MOU. Is it still the same? So are we exchanging data monthly, both ways?
Mr. Linnell.
Madam Chair, Senator Coran, yes, we're providing our data monthly as required by the membership agreements and then taking the reports. There are different timelines at which states may choose to take reports and are taking them at the maximum frequency that they're able to be provided. I think there are some, it may be the change of address reports that aren't available as frequently, or perhaps the death index reports, but we are taking them at the maximum frequency that we are able to do so.
Madam Chair, so Mr.
Senator
Linnell,
Correa.
please define what currently are available or what options are available. I read it that it was twice a year. So now you just delineated a couple categories that may be address or whatever it was. Could you break those down? Which ones are we getting monthly?
Yeah, I will, I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Mr. Linnell.
Senator Coran, we'll go back to make sure that what I'm stating is correct, but my understanding is that for any report that can be provided to us on a monthly basis, we are taking those reports on that monthly schedule. So if it's the compared data against other states' motor vehicle and voter registration databases, if it's the Social Security death indexes, the national change of address data from the Postal Service, as bringing those in each month.
Madam Chair?
Senator Correa.
Just to be clear, the categories that you just identified, we're getting those monthly.
That is my understanding,
Okay.
yes, and I will.
Mr. Linnell.
I'm sorry.
We need to go
Madam
through the
Chair.
chair. Sorry.
Madam Chair, then along with that, all those, any information we receive back, is every change or suggested record or action, pending action item sent to the counties, every single one of them?
Mr. Linnell.
Receive that, Eric?
Madam Chair, Senator Cran, there is the matching process that takes place between the data as well as when it's brought back into the statewide voter registration system. So there is a matching score that needs to be met in order for that data to show, yes, we have the confidence level that this is a match with the voter record in question. As you might expect with the data that we have available, there are potential false positives, so it needs to exceed a certain threshold in order to be passed on. But yes, that information would then be provided to counties to make those corresponding updates.
Madam Chair.
Senator Correa.
Mr. Linnell, then, so no changes, do any changes occur in the statewide voter registration system that are not originated and are managed and controlled by a county?
Mr. Linnell.
Madam Chair, Senator Coran, no. All of the transactions would first be presented to the county auditor or the county election staff to be able to review what is presented to them, and if there's any reason that it suggests the record is not a confirmed match, they would not need to process that. It could make a note and not process that transaction.
Okay.
Senator Coran.
Madam Chair, so the challenge, we've had great conversation, and it's really about, we just want to know people that are eligible to reside. I mean, that's it on the database. And so the report showed a small snapshot in time. Secretary Simon, you've been before the Elections Committee many, many times about your lack of requirements to go out and certify citizenship requirement, meaning eligibility requirements, to be on the statewide voter registration system. So it just continue. You can see the good people can have divergent opinions on, and then your reluctance, if it's so good, then to not have the transparency of the data which we need to have some independent validation of cycle election over election relative to somebody's voter status. Those things used to be available. Now they're not. And we always hear, hey, everything's great. Based on what data? And this snapshot did a good job, right? Our auditors, you guys know where I stand on the Office of the Legislative Auditor. But it's not a snapshot of the entire statewide voter registration system and the data that resides within it. It's a snapshot of work that's done while we're there. And then how is it validated? What do the counties do? When we continually hide or not allow the transparency, which used to exist when our election system was also deemed a great election system. And now like every other report, it goes back to the legislature's providing some very broad categories and broad holes that, yeah, they're legal. It still doesn't build confidence And at the end of the day, no offense, Secretary Simon, but just because you said so is a tough criteria to prove. And that's what we're battling on. We all want everybody to vote. We just want it fair, easy, and verifiable. And so this report shows for a snapshot in time that some things are working well. I'm glad. I want to make sure. But right now, we don't know who has access, or we can't get that snapshot. And so Senator Dibble talked about the federal government. Yeah, we just want to know. And so the constant lack of transparency, and then the constant changes that have granted you legally the lack of transparency in the process is what frustrates most people. So we'll continue to work forward. We as you know, I serve multiple roles on the IT side. We all have a concern that we do those things well. So we'll be working with you in the future on making sure those things get taken care of from an IT perspective. But I don't know further questions, Madam Chair, but thank you.
Sure. Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Greenman, I hope you will take a look at the clock.
Yes.
We have others to testify, and we also have to have
Yes.
a report from the evaluation subcommittee. Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Chair Rest. And I think the reason that this conversation has gone far afield from this audit, and we have heard, I think that's why we're an hour and a half in. So lots of stuff to discuss in committee. I did just want to respond to a few things that both Representative Quam and Senator Cranz said, because we have heard a lot of hypotheticals without evidence and some disproving claims about non-citizen voting, about illegal voting of students. But the one example that got brought up by you, Representative Quam, of an example of illegal registration shows that the system we have set up actually worked. What happened was somebody was registering, and it wasn't an issue of individual registrants, it was an issue of being paid to collect registrations, which is the example you brought up. The counties caught it. They worked with the Secretary of State, who worked with the Department of Justice, who thanked the Secretary of State for dealing with it, and it was caught before anybody was registered and before anybody voted. That's an example of our system working, and this is why what the auditor is looking at, all of those checks and all of the accuracy verifications is really important for that reason. But the thing about accuracy is it matters both that we have a system where ineligible folks are not registered and voting, and where eligible folks are registered and can vote. And both of those sides of accuracy matter. It matters that we are not putting up unnecessary barriers to eligible voters and keeping them from voting, because that would be a pretty inaccurate and inaccessible system too. And so that's what I appreciate about this. The last thing I'll say, and I just wanted to touch on what Senator Dibble said, because it matters, and we're going to go into listening to the counties. But when we hear claims repeated about a non-existent problem of non-citizen voting, which both the Trump Department of Justice in 2016 and now, or in 2020, and now again have not found or prosecuted a widespread problem of fraud. The problem that happens is not just it's inaccurate. It actually puts a target on the back of our local elections administrators. It casts doubt that doesn't need to be there. And we yesterday saw the Department of Justice threaten our elections officials with prosecution for a law that they have for decades across the country been enforcing, and there's no evidence that they're not enforcing. That is real and serious interference and harm to our election system and to the election system that our local elections administrators and our Secretary of State have, according to this audit, very, very intentionally and thoughtfully been implementing. So I do think our words matter. And I think when we talk, we should talk not in hypotheticals, not in non-verifiable or false claims, but in actual data. And that's why I appreciate the OLA. That's why I appreciate that when we bring in things that the court system are dealing with. And that's where I think we should keep it to further people's confidence in our very well-run elections.
Thank you, Representative Greenman. Thank you, Mr. Linnell. Thank you, Secretary, Mr. Secretary, for your